Ja, wir sind gleich fertig. Holger bereitet sich noch kurz vor. Wir werden jetzt das Thema, was ich heute Morgen schon etwas eingeleitet habe, versuchen ein bisschen weiter auszubauen und auch einen bisschen größeren disziplinären Rahmen zu diskutieren. Dabei geht es hauptsächlich um die verschiedenen Methodologien, die wir anwenden, um an die gewünschten Informationen zu gelangen und die Schwierigkeiten, die uns dabei begegnen. Auf dem Panel darf ich ganz herzlich begrüßen einmal Holger Stoecker, Experte für vor allen Dingen die Provenienzforschung zu menschlichen Überresten in ethnografischen Sammlungen und darüber hinaus. Wir haben Bansoa Sigam, die auch aus Genf zu uns gekommen ist. Sehr langer Weg. Sie hat eine sehr große Expertise in der Untersuchung von Weiblichkeit in Sammlungen, die oft vollkommen unsichtbar ist. Und wir haben Taku Bisong, der hier im Naturkundemuseum Berlin an Provenienzforschung im Rahmen von Naturkunde betreibt. So, ich würde euch jetzt, the whole thing should be in English. I'll switch to English now. I just presented you to the audience, and I would like to give you now the chance to present yourself a little bit and maybe give an actual account on what you're working on, because we are quite interested to know what your research is about. Maybe you want to begin, Holger? Yeah, just come over here. Or we can use the mic.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation to this important conference. I'm very honored to be here with you, and I'm an historian. I'm at the moment in a project on sensitive provenances at the University of Göttingen. We had yesterday a repatriation to New Zealand. It was a very moving event for us, for the university, for the whole city of Göttingen, but also for the delegation, of course, from New Zealand. And since 10 years ago, we had a workshop in Dar es Salaam where we presented our results on provenance research on African human remains, especially on the Tanzanian remains. Richard was also there, and Regina Sareter. That is the business of these days, of our project in Göttingen in these days. And I was invited here to present some thought on the specifics and challenges of provenance research on human remains from colonial context. It's just a few ideas which I want to provide and share with you. And yes, my first idea is that human remains are not objects, most important, but mortal remains of human beings that are to be de-objectified and re-individualized by means of provenance research. At least rudimentary elements of a personal biography can be returned to the remains, such as biological sex, the age, the habitat, social affiliations, and in rare cases even the names. The goal of provenance research is a change of the status from an object in an academic collection to an ancestor and a member of the social community. Remains are to be repatriated to these communities of origin if they to wish. The results of provenance research form the knowledge base for the repatriation process. After the repatriation, the remains are usually buried. They find their final resting place and are thus removed from any access by other parties. Further research is no longer possible, and correction to the results of provenance research are hardly possible. This means that in the run-up of restitution, provenance research must produce true and plausible results as possible in order to make repatriation a successful process. In practical terms, that means that determining the provenance of ancestral remains from colonial context usually takes time and human resources. Human remains not only have a personality and a biography, they also consist of human tissue. Therefore, provenance research on human remains pursues two interdisciplinary approaches: the determination of historical provenance and a biological anthropological assessment. The latter examines the important individual data, such as the age of the person at the time of death, biological sex, diseases, and cause of death. Interdisciplinary cooperation is absolutely necessary, to my opinion, but is also a challenge for both sides. This is especially the case when the pre-assumption of anthropological analysis became too closely linked to approaches of the racial anthropology, which are often not reflected upon critically enough. For example, when biological data are used for attribution to or the exclusion from social communities. This happens, for example, when the skull from the burial site of a Tanzanian village does not meet the average standards of an African skull. It then requires long discussion about the migration history from Arabia or from Asia to East Africa, and about the question, who is an African? Is African an anthropological or in social and historical category? And last point, cooperation with representatives of the communities of origin and with experts from the countries of origin has become a matter of course for any provenance research on colonial contexts. The question of sensitivities in dealing with ancestral remains during the research process is answered very differently by the communities of origin and must therefore be asked and discussed separately in each case. This requires an open communication from all who are involved, which sometimes take more and sometimes less time. A challenge here is that the partners of the countries of origin sometimes follow different paths in the creation of knowledge than we do in our Western science system. For example, when we in Göttingen examined Iwikupuna ancestral remains from Hawaii, we found out that in 2 cases the mandibles did not match the skulls. We did not know whether these mandibles also came from Hawaii or whether they were only added in the anatomy in Göttingen and came from completely different contexts. The question was therefore whether the mandibles could also be restituted. We asked our partner from the Office for Hawaiian Affairs how we could proceed in these cases. His response was, "No problem, I will ask our spiritual seer, she will decide the case." After a few days, the answer came that the seer had found out that the mandibles were also from Hawaii and so they should be also repatriated. We were not told how this seer came to this conclusion. We accepted the decision, of course, even though doubts remained. After a few weeks later, we found historical sources according to which the mandibles actually came from Hawaii and were already added to the skulls there. So in this case, historical research confirmed the seer's judgment. The mandibles could be repatriated as remains of 2 other ancestors. To be honest, I cannot say what would happen if we had come to different conclusions. Yes, what I want to say with this is that we should have a close communication on all different perspectives, and sometimes we have also accept different results of the prevalence research. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Holger. That is, it's always, for me, it's always very strange to hear these things, because yeah, it's incredible to see what humans do with humans. And we have this problem in the ethnographic collections too, that we often find human remains that are not classified as human remains, and there is no respect in working on these. I think this shows that above the provenance research itself, there is a lot of ethical questions, ethical problems that arise even after defining the object. Where does it come from, or the subject, and that the problems do not end with provenance research, but I think start. I want to come back to this later, in the later part of this discussion again. But first I would like to introduce Bansoa, who will tell us a little bit more about her research now. Do you want to sit? Do you want to come over here? I can give you a microphone.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to be able to take part in this panel. And I thank the entire Cook team for how they've helped me develop my project. And thank you so much, Benedict, for inviting me. Benedict is my co-director for my PhD, and I'm working as well with Professor Jean-François Stazac in the University of Geneva. So it's interdisciplinary research around women's heritage. And that's how I titled it Heritage. It's sort of a cultural her story. And the question is, when we're investigating women's heritage, who are we talking about? And there are so many layers of women in the ethnographic collections, and all of these women share the commonality to be often hidden, invisible, and that's one part of my research, is to bring to light women's heritage. From a museum perspective, it's been often thought of, when I talked about women's heritage, it was often thought of as women artists in museum or women collectors. But then there are these layers of women who come, that are actresses, that come into play. They can be the women who are responsible for the entry into collection. And we had talked about this Geschenk, the gift, and a lot of times with the object biographies, it comes through women who gift it at the end to the museum, even if they had been collected years prior. There's a recent case in the Museum of Ethnography in Geneva where there's the descendant of a male missionary who operated in Central Africa in the 1900s, gave in 2022 women figure to the museum. And then there are the women who are responsible for the collecting, so to whom collections are attributed, but do we know if they're the ones taking it? It's not about the the giving, but it's more the taking, it's about the propriety. And then finally, and which is completely invisible and completely hidden, are the women to which these either pieces belonged or who were at the initiation or conception, or to whom the figures represented. So these are all these different women who are completely hidden and invisible, and that are also entangled. They're not categories that don't overlap between each other. Wait a minute. Sorry, I'm trying to make it very, as short as possible, but it's an ongoing doctoral thesis that takes years. So it might take more than 5 minutes, but I'll try to be short. Just 2 quotes that are a bit anachronic and anatopic, because they're regarding Belgian Congo in the 1920s. And my research focuses on Cameroon mainly, and then as Gabon as well in the colonial era. So the first one comes from the Bulletin de l'Union des Femmes Coloniales, who says the entire social program in full development at home is asking for an adaptation in the colony, and maybe women will contribute in part to solve the so distressing question of indigenous workforce. And then the second one is from Pierre Vigny, who was Minister of the Colonies in Belgian Congo. The problem of social welfare is particularly important regarding indigenous women that we need to win over to our conceptions, because it is through women that the achievement of civilization are passed on from generation to generation. So I think these 2 quotes are very impactful in the sense that they show the link between the metropole and the colony, and how everything, the processes that are going on in the metropole and the colonies are entangled in a form of quantum entanglement. So the last one is a quote from Louis Verlaine, who thought about the colonizing mindset in Belgian Congo. The essential is that she gives us children, a lot of children, and our intervention towards her should not have another goal than to make her a more prolific, a better mother. All these quotes are, they've been cited from Gertrude Miana, who's a professor on cultural history and who's worked on Belgian Congo. And I thought it was a great framework to think about how the captations of heritage on women had an impact, a goal of constructing women identity both in the colony and in the metropole at the same time. So it's this process, it's a two-faced process in a way. So as far as provenance research, it's still an ongoing research that I'm doing, but this is one of the example of women, like heritage specific to women that were worn by women, and they are metal. I'd say necklaces, but then again, it's all these terms are very important to deconstruct, and I would say an embodied piece, and the materiality of it is in metal, and a lot of times in the collections and inventories, you find them broken, and their materiality a test of how they've been taken. And then one part of my research was to cross-examine how they've been how they've been taken, what they show, and what the archives show about them, and the published sources. And it's this connected history that is fruitful in provenance research. Maybe I'll pass that because that takes hours. It's the summary of my research, basically. And it's three different axes in, at the same time, Switzerland. I'm focusing on ethnographic collections in Romandie, it's like French-speaking Switzerland. And and at the same time, what's going on in Cameroon. So the challenges that arise as far as provenance research, and I think Sebastian has highlighted this well in the Atlas, is that there are a lot of times a lack of information, no information, false information, and partial information. And what is going on now in the another challenge for me is that working with museum databases is that it's a dynamic moment for museums. So the databases are constantly evolving as well. When I started my research in 2021, the database I was looking at was about 16,000 objects, and now, and entities and agencies, and now it came up to 18,000, almost. So it shows that there are so much work being done in the museum, but also that the numbers that I'm sometimes basing my research on are evolving as well, because new information comes out. The second axis is about the collections, and the challenges are about layered acquisition. So we know that in the missionary context, there are a lot of exchanges between missionaries. It's a reticular type of organization, so it could be one that has sold to another one. And so as far as these specific provenance researchers are concerned, sometimes it's interesting to have cross-museum study, and it requires a lot more of archival research. There are a lot of hidden women, a lot of invisible women, so we don't know names, we don't know who they belong to, or who acquired them, when, and how. And finally, as far as Cameroon, so this is the last part with the red image. There's a lack of information about a lot of the pieces that are presented, and it's the colonial legacy is a paradigmatic shift, as we've been hearing for these past panels and discussions. And there's an institutional plurality. So these are some of the challenges in mapping my research. And yeah, I think the solutions are around new ontologies, new narratives, new wordings, and reviving old stories. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bansoa. That was very, very interesting. We always have the problem in our research that we are confronted with a set of data where sometimes you see a list, and this is a list from a military officer, and you see all these weapons and whatever he leaves there, and then there's like a part where 20 objects are obviously like from the beauty case of a woman, and then you wonder, but how and why? And the whole colonial project, as well known, was a male project until the 1900s, when the Europeans started to bring their own women also into the colony. But that doesn't mean that before there was no femininity or female agency in the colonies, mainly by the local women, and all these are hidden in the collections, and like colonial history is now trying also to go beyond this male domain and find like the female aspects of colonial history. This is also true for the collections. But we will come back to that later too. First, I want to introduce you to Paul Taku Bisong and his work on the Natural History Museum in Berlin.
Can you fix this? Okay.
Technical University.
Okay. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be here. I was invited here as a member of the University of Jena, and actually, I heard a little bit. I had I was introduced to some of your work by my professor in the University of Jena. But right now, at the moment, I'm more or less affiliated to the Museum für Naturkunde. I'm working with the Humanities of Nature department, and the members of my department right here with me today. And I would like to consider what we're doing today in the Museum of Naturkunde as part of what I started in the University of Jena, because there's the link. There's a link for both researches regarding the museum. What I mean is the Museum für Naturkunde in 1889 was designated as through a federal decision as a destination for all natural history collections from German colonies all over the world. All these collections to Germany were designated or destined to the Natural Museum für Naturkunde, which was then the Berlin Zoological Museum. In my master's thesis, I reviewed on what I consider to be the formal onset of these collections through Bernhard Weißenborn, who was a member of the Batanga expedition, which I think was part of Jan's list. He was sent to Cameroon as a member of the Batanga team, which was a research expedition, and as the only researcher, he was primarily, from my perspective, the most important member of this team, because as a research expedition, it would be more or less impossible to achieve the research goals without the researcher being able to, assess or being part of this expedition. So Weißenborn would draft, I would say, the first incomplete report on the nature of the biodiversity in the interior of Cameroon. Before the Batanga expedition, what was more or less known about Cameroon was limited to the coast. Weißenborn would draft this report and would also collect some of naturalist, not more or less zoological collections, which would be sent over to Germany, but he would unfortunately die and would, now this would rather leave the expedition in an incomplete level. The expedition was required to establish a research station in the heart of Cameroon, the Yaoundé research station, but this station was actually never used by Weißenborn for this purpose. His report was limited to the objects or zoological objects or animals he noted as they advanced into Cameroon. So what we are doing here today is in the Museum für Naturkunde, is to assess what this natural history collection, which came in to Germany after the Batanga expedition, after Weißenborn, our hope is to make this more or less accessible to Cameroonians and Africans in general, because in my perspective, I believe these collections would be much more relevant to Africa to the territories where they were collected compared to anywhere else in the world. I've been able to witness all the researches from, different disciplines which uses these collections today, and how the results have in one way or another provided a more or less a deeper understanding to the subject matters of their researches, and how perhaps the proposals have been used to tackle or manage some of the problems facing the world today, from global warming, nature conservation. So I believe that if we can make this accessible to Cameroonians, then Cameroon will be able to benefit in a similar way as the West have benefited from these objects which were collected from their territory. So what we're doing now is to, with limited resources, is to we're trying to publish the type specimen in the mammal department, in the mammal collection, type specimen from Cameroon in the mammal collections. The mammal collections, because we believe for a start that perhaps I assume other zoologists would agree with me, the mammals are more or less the most prominent groups of animals. And the type specimens, perhaps I need not define it, is the most important type of zoological, the most important zoological objects in a natural history collection. So we are hoping that if we make this available, the different stakeholders, from the government to conservationists or to us as Cameroonians, would be able to use this in a significant way in our researches. I'll give you a few examples. With the report from Weissenborn or other subsequent reports from natural history on the nature of Cameroon, which constitute the earliest report on the biodiversity of Cameroon, if this can be used in a significant way by researchers to model the situation of biodiversity over 100 years ago, over a century ago, to know what has changed compared with the situation today. It could be possible that this collection had a serious impact on the biodiversity, which was perhaps intact before this collection, because collecting, we kill these species, we displace and destroy the ecosystems, and this also has an impact on the indigenes who depend on this for their source of living. So these are researches we can expand with these data, and also based on researches on the provenance of this research, not the provenance of these zoological objects, we can uncover hidden aspect of the history of Cameroon. With regards to Weissenborn, as a member of the Batanga expedition, most researchers on the Batanga expedition was not aware of the existence of a researcher, Weissenborn, as part of this expedition. We uncovered documents from archive on Weissenborn's personal experiences, which add a new insight on the situation in the Batanga expedition, which was never documented before. So we believe that if we make this available, it's a form of giving back to Cameroon, perhaps not the only way, but giving back to Cameroon what was taken from them as far as natural history is concerned. And we're really hoping that the different stakeholders, the government, conservationists, and Cameroonians would make use of this opportunity. It shouldn't just be a case of what next, as was one of the questions earlier today, but we can learn from researchers who uses these collections on how important these collections are and how they can be used to solve our current problems regarding to biodiversity conservation. And and I really, I'm really hoping that this would, to a significant extent, help us in Cameroon in a similar way. Yeah, and yes, thank you. But yeah, I just wanted to add that the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development had particularly requested researches of this nature to be made available to the government to help them establish better policies, improve on the conservation policies. So we're also hoping that researchers on natural history in Germany and as well as in Cameroon, or those who would using these collections or these reports or this data in future would make use of this opportunity and provide their researches or their results through the government and through whatever possible channels, be it the embassy, and and thank you.
Thank you, Paul. That also was very interesting. We had some cooperation with the Natural History Museum in our project with Lindy W. Breuer, and so we already had a little insight in what is going on in the Natural History Museum. But I think I would like to sit down too and open up the discussion a little bit. You were talking a lot about access to the collections of the natural history and how important it is. I would like to broaden up that and ask you, Holger and Bansoa, what is your feeling about the access to the documents? Is it easy, or maybe what are the major problems that you have in your studies concerning the access to the archival material? If you want to start, Bansoa, yeah.
Yeah, I can start. So I have a background as a museologist, so I've gotten to work with the people in the museum I'm working on, so that really helps also for the access. I also find it difficult. There are like a few different aspects of it. So since I've worked in a museum, I know there are different systems of organization within a museum, how things are classified, depending on the leadership at a time, depending on which type of technologies, which type of inventories. So for instance, at the Museum of Ethnography in Geneva, where I worked, recently, they've added the OCR layer, so that means you can do like a keyword search, so that makes it easier. The challenge as far as accessing physically the collection, this is extremely challenging, very much so, because also the collections are moving and have been moving from storage for the past 10 years. I think there have been a lot of different storage mise en commun. So, yeah, exactly. Put together of different storage of different museums. So that means a lot of the collections are moving, so their access is also not facilitated by that physically. And also then the protocols within each museum to access the collection is different. But for me, the major thing was to have access to physical collection. It was, I've worked with people who made it easy for me to do so, because also this is what they do in their museums. Accessing and also having a database online was useful, but then the information is extremely partial, so that was a problem of access for me during COVID, especially.
Yeah, thank you very much. Do you have any, because we have the museum representatives here, do you have any wishes? Why not?
Yes.
Yeah, just tell them.
No, yes, because I'm thinking like, I'm doing my research, I told you, I'm like in the most privileged position to do a provenance research on collections that I've worked with, that I know, but I'm thinking of people who are far away and that the access to the database is extremely important. So I think that's for me, like that's the principal thing. And but I think, like, I would say that the museums have done a tremendous work by putting, first of all, their collections online. That's, like, for me, what should be done. But then and then making it as collaborative as possible, as far as filling in what it's about, and not secluding the knowledge production around that.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Holger, I think in your domain this might become even more complicated, I imagine. Maybe you tell us a little bit about your work and major problems.
Thank you. The access to archival material is in between no problem, so far as the collections are in public property, in public institutions. Especially since about 2016, when the repatriation of human remains became an official goal of the policy of the foreign policy, especially of the federal government. Another case are the private collections. There is no rule about the access to these collections and to the archives and the documents in these collections. For example, the Berlin Society for Anthropology, Ethnology and Prehistory is a famous example for this. In a way, you are depend from the decision of the society how to handle with such applications for accession. And yeah, it's not really easy in these cases.
And especially concerning the human remains. I just remember when we found, when we were in the Museum of Leipzig, we discovered 3 human remains that were not documented in the database. And this like made a big problem for the museum too, because then, oh, we have a human remains, we have dead people in the cave. What do? Everybody just call the director. So it was like they reacted very nicely. So Leontine, Fred, thank you very much. But it was not a usual situation, and so that because of this respect to the dead people, I think that was what I meant. Is that more problematic to access human remains, or is it like, okay, these are objects, just take it?
I think it depends from who are you. If you are a researcher, I think with a proper project, it should be not a problem. But if you are a journalist or don't know, not having serious goal with this, it could be a problem. Yes, and I think it's okay that not everybody could make this private interest. I mean, this remains have a highly sensitivity. So I think it should be discussed and with the communities of origin how we can handle with the accessibility of these collections. It's more sensitive than ethnological objects in general, I think.
Thank you very much. I would like to proceed a little bit and go to Paul. When we consider all the very bad data in the museums and the questions that arise, I think maybe Holger and Bansoa and I are working a little bit in the same way. I would be interested in the natural history department. How do you identify the objects that are important for you? And which problems arise on the level to identify them?
Well, I think the problem we face is more or less the general problems in other museums, like incomplete collecting information. Sometimes dates are missing. Sometimes collector names are missing. So we also face these challenges in our research. And it becomes very problematic in a case where you want to perhaps reconstruct a list of collectors or dates of collection. Then this will in some way affect the results and or the output. So what we do is we try to put out which specimens have what problems, because our job, our interest is to make this data available and not to fabricate any new data. So who would access this should know the limitations with each specimen and would decide in his or her own way on how to use this in an appropriate way for the research.
Thank you. I'm asking because I had the impression that natural history data is much more complete than the ones in ethnographic collections. I'm not sure now about that, but I realized that many of the collectors that are in ethnographic museums left also different kinds of specimen objects in other kind of museums. So you always find the same person in the different museum styles. And I realized that sometimes a military officer, which was on a military raid operation, and it was at the same time doing cartography and collecting insects and documenting the plants on the spot, that sometimes there was like documentation, okay, I shot this bird on this day at that place at that time. And then at the same day, this same person delivered 200 cultural objects to museums, but there is no data at all. So, is it? Am I right or not? Is it more precise? Do you have like these precise dates and places or not?
Yeah, I can give you an example of one of such collectors. And recently, there was a presentation on Adolf Dell, and as an ethnographic collector. Adolf Dell is also on our list of natural history collections collectors from the museum. I think it was your elephant, no? Okay, yeah. So there's a species of an elephant, Gorilla Delhi. So it was named after Adolf Dell. So this is an example of a collector who was more or less collecting all these different objects, ethnographical, natural history, plants. So in the museum, in the museum, when we are faced with these kind of questions or challenges of, I think your question is more or less like, are the dates right or wrong, But unfortunately, this is, I don't think we can fix this, except we have to fabricate, or except we have literature to provide, further information to alter the data, the current data in any significant form. Whereas otherwise we just have to work and assume that what information is attached to the label or associated with the specimen, it's correct to some extent. There's literally no way we can fix this, I think so, except we have archival materials which can prove otherwise. So otherwise we would rather work with what we have, but it's very important to us in the museum to specify what problem is associated with what specimen, and not totally insist that it's always right. So with the museum data, we're always skeptical to some extent, but yeah, we just have to work with it.
Thank you. Then there are more similarities than I thought. But very interesting. Concerning the way we research, I would like to ask Bansoa, because she has this very interesting and very difficult task to make the invisible visible. Could you give us an example how you do it? Maybe one object where you just, how do you work with it? How do you come to the feminine side of the collection, of the object, of the subject?
I'm trying to work as much that's why I structured my research in 3 axes. I'm trying to decenter a bit the knowledge production. So not starting from the collection of such and such, like not only this angle, and working from the object perspective. But for instance, I've worked on a collection that is that's not directly part of my research, but I'm thinking of including it in. But that is 400 pieces, and that were brought from Lesotho. And a lot of them, they're called such like women's jewelry. So it's in French, so it's de femme. And so I'm trying to see within those, within this specific collections, are names written? Where can I find it, either in the database, or what's interesting here is that there's also a collector's database. So are there layers of information that can be found around what has been identified as women's collection about those women, and what type of knowledge do we have about them? So that could be taken to a woman, given by a woman. This is the sort of the words that I'm looking at. Sold by a woman, and yeah, such and such, and then names and how it actually happened.
Thank you. Just interesting just to get an idea. And how important for you are other materials not coming from the museum? Do you use any, like we used maps or cartography to solve a lot of questions, or to get around the major problems? Is there any method you can use to get deeper into the subject, or to get around the problems? Or generally your material, does it consist of? Is it only material from the museums, or do you consider a lot of material from colonial history also? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm considering a lot of archival material from especially missionary history, because my corpus consists mainly on missionary collections, and that's also specific with Swiss museums in this part of Switzerland. There has been a mission museum that the collections have been transferred. So yeah, I'm looking also at missionary history.
What would you say? Which is the source that is the richest one beside the museum collection that you can consult? Is there any, or if not, it's no problem.
I don't get your question, but I mean, the methodology is different for each of my axes. So now when I'm saying I'm looking at missionary history, it's mainly for this history of collections, the part of the colonial legacy and the colonial paradigm. So for the part in Cameroon, which I'm not exactly at yet, I think a lot of different sources are gonna come in, but there are, as far as missionary collections, a lot of the data is already published sources. There are photographic archives, and it's very accessible.
Yeah, thank you. That's I just wanted to know, but it's a little bit the same with us. We if we really want to know something about one object, we have to be very situation specific and take into account what is there. Just like cartography was a way to really work on a quantitative base, where we can not only look at one object but at a lot of objects at the same time. So because time is advancing, one more question or not? Great. Mhm. Maybe then one last question that I'm curious about, maybe to you, Holger. You mentioned also the interdisciplinary work. How important is that for you, or what do you? Yeah, any wishes for the museums?
I think it's very important, but it's not without problems. As I mentioned, the approaches from natural sciences and humanities are different, and we have to discuss these different approaches and to came to a common result with respect the sensitivities of the communities of origin, and to overcome the old-fashioned racist approaches of this anthropology.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you very much for this first panel. Thank you for to the audience too. Thank you for listening.